repeat the question that we asked originally, lo these 25 minutes ago. And also I'm going to sorry, I just realized that Erin is probably having trouble finding us. Okay. She has the link now. I'm glad I went to look. We are so professional. It is like this, by the way, when we are recording the podcast. We just edit all of this out. Not the audio problems, that's just a normal sound check for us. The whole including video is still relatively new for us. And every time we think we've solved it, some small change happens. For instance, I moved to Denver. So I'm on a new system and a new network, which may be part of what's going on for this. All right, I'm going to repeat the question that we started with. So that you can hear that. And then, and we'll hopefully Erin will come in by then. Hi, I'm writing a story that is a retelling of a fairy tale. The story follows the fairy tale for a bit, although with different names and settings, before deviating at a certain point. For example's sake, let's say that Cinderella goes to the ball, but when she's dancing with the prince, he pulls a knife on her and demands to know where the fairy godmother is so he can have the magic for himself. I was wondering how much of the original fairy tale I should write up until the point where it deviates. How many of my beginning chapters should be Cinderella doing the washing, arguing with her family, meeting the fairy, going to the ball, etc. So basically, when you're doing a fairy tale retelling, how much of the original do you need to use? Entirely optional. You don't have to use very much of it. You can use it completely as a jumping off point and then run away from it. I have at least two fairy tale retellings that are unidentifiable. One is called In Serbo Vitro Ujo, which is a retelling of the Snow Queen. And then I have another one that's very identifiable. It's Trip Trap Tripping, which is the Three Billy Goats Gruff retold. And that one, it's way more identifiable. And haha, we have Erin. Yay, there's two of us. Hurrah! And they can hear me. Now the question, can you hear me?
I can. I just need to mute every other tab that I've got going so that I only hear you in one place.
Amazing.
Just getting surround sound of you, which is beautiful, but not great for talking when they're 30 seconds delayed from each other. Okay. There we go. Oh my gosh, we're both here. It's real.
Yay! Okay, so while you were moving over, I recapped, I reread the fairy tale thing, and then gave my answer to it. Shall we move on? And we'll just ask someone to be really brilliant and edit yours into it.
Sounds good.
Great. Okay. Oh, let's do the opening again since that didn't happen since I was
Yes.
silent. Oh, so patient. We're just going to start now and then the second question, and then hopefully we'll edit everything else in. Hi, this is Writing Excuses, Season 19, the May 21st Q&A. I'm one of your hosts, Mary Robinette Kowal.
I'm Erin Roberts, another one of your hosts.
And every month we do this for our Patreon supporters, and then share it with everybody else. But we have questions that they've sent in to us. So we're going to move on to this one. Um, this person says that a lot of advice pitched at helping writers network is aimed at the sort of folks who don't have a lot of experience starting conversations with new people. So what if you are already skilled at in-person networking, as in that's already the major part of your day job? What are the main conferences or venues to attend, or is anything that someone with a more networking heavy background should know?
I think we both love. I think of all the the writing excuses hosts are the most in person networking focused. And so I would say three random pieces of advice. One is to remember that this is similar to what you're used to. I think sometimes when you move into a space where you're not as comfortable, where there are people with maybe more experience than you in the writing world, it can like mess with your mind and make you more awkward than you might be if you were going to your trade industry conference that you've been going to for 15 years. So be aware of that and like try to think of like these are also just humans in a different trade, in a different industry, and I should treat them the way that I would use that experience and try to like move it over as smoothly as I can. I think that's the main thing is just in terms of just general advice, and then we can get into specific conferences. But I think just trying to still be yourself or the way you are in networking, and then just know that the lingo is different. Like I used to go with my mom to H&R Block when she worked. My mom once worked for H&R Block, and I used to go to their conferences, and like they would be like speaking in these wild acronyms that I still don't understand, and I had no idea what they were talking about. And sometimes you forget that the writing industry has that as well, things that we reference that we expect everyone to know, and it's okay not to know those or ask somebody or just try to catch up as best you can and just put yourself out there.
Yeah, and I think the just to add on to what Erin was saying, the other piece is that conversational styles differ from group to group. So I have seen people come in who were extremely adept at networking in their industry, and they come into a writing conference and come off as pushy or like the people are don't know how to interact with them because it's a different rhythm, it's a different scenario. But most of the advice about networking is, to be interested in the other person, to have stuff in your pocket that you can share, but to not like immediately jump into sales. So we're going to assume that you're decent at that. When you're thinking about the main conferences or venues to attend, um, for me, the question would be, what are you looking for out of these? Um, if you're looking to network, then all of the advice that we've given about where to go, those are still going to be good places to meet people and create that network. If you're looking for, I don't actually want to build a larger, different network. I just want to level up my writing game. Those are going to be different conferences potentially. So, like I think writing excuses, not writing, I mean, yes, the writing excuses workshop is very good. What I was going to say was the Nebula workshop, Nebula conference, I think is a very good place. There's a lot of industry professionals there, and then there's also craft stuff going on as well. Um, there's a ton of others. Erin, what are some of the ones you'd suggest?
I would say, along with the nebulas, that, and sadly, these are also the three most expensive, in my opinion, cons to attend. So maybe they know that, but the nebulas, Stoker Con, if you're more horror oriented, and World Fantasy, if you have any fantasy adjacent things, are the conferences where I think you see the most industry professionals. So, and like if those are, and Worldcon, depending on what's, Worldcon differs from year to year,
Yeah.
but I would say those three are the ones where where you get the most free books, but they charge you the most. I think it's to pay for the free books that they give you. So maybe bring a second suitcase for that. But I think those are the ones where you're going to get more of an industry to industry perspective, in terms of bigger cons versus a fan perspective. But I think that kind of like karaoke, of course, shockingly, I have a karaoke metaphor. Like there, like there are people who like to go to like rock out karaoke places, and there are people who go to sad ballad karaoke places. Those are not the same place. Well, usually. And so I think also what your goals are important. Like maybe you just want to build up your local community, in which case I would look for a local con. Like, is there a con within like an hour or two drive, or whatever of you that you can get to? Because that's how you'll find people who are willing to beta your work that you could see every other month versus people who may live very far away from you. If you want to run your work by a bunch of agents, there are cons where they literally, you can sign up to meet with a bunch of agents in a row, and you should look for that on the programming. So I think it just depends on finding your style. And then, like what Mary Robinette said, when you get there, just like when you get to a new karaoke space, you should listen for a few songs before you put your number in. I think really getting a sense of what the vibe is before you kind of run in isn't always a good way to figure out if your style that you're used to is working for this new situation.
Yeah. Good advice. I love the karaoke analogy. I was sitting there going, do I have a puppetry analogy? Just move on. Um, I'm very good at coming up with character settings and tension-filled situations, but I have a hard time translating that into any sort of overarching conflict or plot. Where do I start? Uh, so, good question. The one of the things that I suspect is you've got the tension-filled situation and you have the character. What you're looking for is something that is going to move the character, like once that situation resolves, what happens next? And it's that overarching thing of how do you keep escalating? How do you move forward? And to be clear, not every story has to escalate and have a rising action and falling action, but based on the phrase tension-filled situations, I'm guessing that's the kind of story you're interested in writing. And so what I would say is to look at the tension-filled situation. And here's where I'm going to refer to the mice quotient. Um, Surprising no one who listens to the podcast. That is an acronym made up of milieu, inquiry, character, and event. For people who've just stumbled across us, we do a deep dive into this in the podcast. You can just look up mice quotient. What you can do with that is you can look at the tension-filled situation and you can ask one of four questions. Is your character attempting to navigate through or survive in a place? And if that's the case, or exit, if that's the case, then you have what's called a milieu, which means that everything is place-based and you can escalate from that. Is your character trying to answer a question? Then you have an inquiry thread already baked in. You can escalate from that. Uh, is your character struggling with angst and self-doubt? Are they unhappy with some part of themselves? Do they have internal conflict? You have a character story that's already baked in. You can escalate from there. And then the last one would be, are they trying to change the status quo? Something about the larger world outside of themselves. Again, that then is an event, and you can escalate from there. You can also start mixing and matching. So if you're if you say, oh, okay, hey, you know what, I do have an event. I've got this tension-filled situation where someone has disrupted the status quo by entering the room with a gun. That means that at the end, what you know is that if you want to have a happy ending, we have a new status quo or have restored the old status quo, and your character is happy with that choice. If you want a tragedy, then your character has utterly failed to do anything successful. But those give you an ending point to aim for. And then that allows you to say, okay, well, let me come up with some temp posts. How do I start heading in that direction? What are your ideas, Erin?
So the thing that I love, that I love a reason to talk about the mice quotient, but the this is less organized, but I'm thinking about like the guy who has the board, the murder board, with the different index cards and the string between them. That
Multiple
the
people. Yeah. Yeah.
many people have this. I don't know why the image I'm seeing is this meme of a dude, but anyway, it could be anyone. And what you're sort of wanting to do is think sometimes you have all those characters and the settings and the tension filled situations as the little index cards, but the strings between them are what's missing.
Yeah.
So what I would do is two things. One is connect to, pick any two. Just the way that like a person on a murder board will. They'll be like, how could this be connected to how could this, glass of water be connected to, I don't know, global warming? I'll find out and figure out what is a way that you could connect them and then think, does this work? And try as many connections as you can until something feels good. And then go, okay, I've got these two connected. What connects the second one to another thing? And then you can sort of like stutter step your way, more robot dance for me, towards the like the thing you want. The other thing is making sure that your individual index cards aren't wrapping up too neatly. I think sometimes we have a tension filled situation and it wraps so quickly that it's like, well, that's the end of that. Now I have nothing to move forward. So I like to think of those strings as like electrical wires. Don't actually set up electrical wires in a board in your house unless you know what you're doing. But it's like it's a like you want to have that electrical wire taking something from the original index card and zipping it forward to jolt the next one. And then that one can resolve that tension and jolt something new to the next index card. And in that way, you always have a little bit of forward jolt that creates momentum in your story as you're doing these awesome like shapes that Mary Robinette was talking about.
Yeah, that's I love that. And one of the things that I do sometimes when I'm looking for those jolts, that the connection points, is that I love I I love reading and playing, like writing unlikely pairings. One
Mm.
of my, for instance, one of the things that I have not written this scene yet. I've just used it as an example, and I want to write it. Um, is you've got the story of this dad who's desperately trying to connect with the teenager, and and then you have a separate story where the dad is also a CIA, like is Mission Impossible, and these are two completely separate things. But then you have a Mission Impossible scene where you're like dodging all of the lasers, and then the kid calls and you're like, yeah, yeah, absolutely, I can help you with your math homework. Yes, yes, let me just dodge this laser. Well, and so suddenly you have this additional tension because you have to deal with dodging lasers. And how do you do differential calculus? I don't remember how to do that anymore, but I can't blow my kid off because I've been trying to connect so much. And you have a ridiculous scene that's suddenly way more interesting and tense than if you had one or the other, where you would have to introduce some sort of like, oh no, I've dropped a thing while I'm doing the lasers. It's like, we've all seen that. Yes, thank you. Um, I'm helping you with math homework. No, you're just stupid. It's like, we've seen that.
Putting them together adds like an extra, and it helps people join, make connections. I forget every time I mention this what it is called, but there is a principle in film, I think, that comes from silent films, that if you give people two images, they will create a connection between them because that's how human brains work. And sometimes we use it in gaming. That's why, like, a lot of times in games, you'll have like one or two key stats. And then from that, people will build an entire character life. So by
Yeah,
having those two things that are so different, it allows for us to create such depth in between them. I love that.
yeah.
It's awesome.
Speaking of things that are extremely different, Erin, I'm going to go ahead and put this next one up and let you read it while I attempt to stop my dog, who her nemesis is on the other side of the fence. Her nemesis is a rabbit.
Oh no. Okay. Well, in a this particular question, if the person is here who asked it, we shortened it slightly, just to maintain anonymity. But it says, I've had positive feedback on my work from an industry professional, but it came from someone who gave me very bad vibes when I met them and made me feel creepy. In a world where there are definite bad actors and missing stairs out here sexually harassing people, how do you balance your desire to move through the industry and make connections with being able to sleep at night and not feel gross? And how do you separate, if you do, the personality of people who like your work from their professional criticism?
I'm gonna jump in on this one first because
Yeah.
I've had
Mm.
this experience, and it's awful. I know a lot of people who have had this experience. It is fortunately not the norm. Most of the people that you will encounter um, are not creepy assholes. So the way you balance your desire to move through the industry with being able to sleep at night is don't work with those people. It will only get worse. They will string you along. They will continue to take advantage of you. Don't work with them. Uh, what you're going to try to do is find a different community. Um, and you are fortunate in a certain uh, uh, form of the word fortunate in that you were able to identify the person as being as being a bad actor. I know people who have gotten sucked in, and to be clear, when I'm talking about this, uh, there's you know there have been people who are not in the community anymore who were major editors who strung people along for years and never did anything with their manuscripts. Um, and the people they were stringing along did not identify them. So step away from the person. Your writing is good. They are preying on you because you have something. So you can walk away and find someone else to work with that will not treat you like an object. Um, and I'm sorry that that has happened to you. It's awful. Uh, and um, I just want to encourage you to believe in yourself and your skills, and your movement through the industry is not dependent on creepy assholes. And also, those creepy assholes frequently don't have a lot of people they can work with, so they aren't going to be able to move you through the industry.
Yeah. Agree 100%. I think the only thing I would add is that this is maybe a broader question or broader version of this, but there are people in the world who you would never want to spend 1 second with who will resonate with your work. And you don't want them to resonate with your work. They are not great people, but they do anyway. And you can't stop that from happening. And nothing, a bad person liking your good work does not make your work worse. It doesn't diminish your talent. It doesn't diminish anything that you're doing. The fact that they are like not are horrible is not like this is the one good thing about them. They're only redeeming quality. They've got good taste in literature, but horrible in every other way. That's the way that I like to think about it. Like, wow, too bad that they can't take this with them and improve the other parts of their life because this is a good thing. But, I think it can be easy to sort of take it personally and think that like if somebody like this likes me or wants to advance my career or just even reads my work and writes me a 20-page fan letter, then it says something about me. It says nothing about you except that your work is the kind that resonates so loudly that sometimes it catches people who suck.
Yeah, yeah. And also one of the other things that many of these predators do is that they try to convince you that your worth only comes from them. And that is false, but it is one of the ways that uh, they get the things that they want by gaslighting you, by preying on your insecurities. So I will tell you again that if they are doing this, it is because there's something there. I did not have this start happening to me until I won the Astounding Award for Best New Writer. And then suddenly, one of the biggest missing stairs in the industry was like, well, hello there. I was like, uh-huh. Um, fortunately has been removed from the industry. But it is trust yourself, trust your talent, um, and then find a community that supports you and nurtures you and values you for who you are instead of what you can do for them. All right, let's talk about revisions. Um,
Hmm.
so, how many revisions do you give a project before you pass it on to beta readers? At what point do you start to create or solidify the themes? And one of sorry, it's actually before you pass it on to a beta reader, do you give the first pass away? Do you give the first draft away or at least give it a revision or two? And at what point do you start to create or solidify themes? And when do you think a project is ready for querying? So there's a lot of questions in this question. Um, I don't even spell check mine before I hand it to my beta readers.
Wow. I love that
Um,
for you.
my beta readers are really alpha readers. They are getting it. I stay 3 chapters ahead of them. So they like when I finish chapter 4, they get chapter 1. And I'm not even spell checking, but I tell them I don't want them to talk about language. All I'm interested in is how it plays. But I come out of theater where you do your blocking rehearsals, you rough out a scene, you're like, let's just get them on our feet and try it, and then you iterate and you go through these iterations. So I'm used to being able to do that without and knowing that a draft is a draft. It's not until it's out in the world that it's set. It's until it has an audience of paying customers. So I start handing it out straight away. Um, for that's for me for question one. Erin is very different from me.
I was like, nope. I I love that for you, but not for
I
me.
know.
I am like the opposite. I don't send things. I bring things to readers when either I can't see anything wrong with it or I can see a bunch of things wrong with it, but I don't know how to fix them. Because the things that I want to know are what can I do? What can I not do in my own head that you can help me figure out how to do by talking me through this? And so I like mull over things a lot. And so I usually only will have one critique pass after I finish. Like by the time I finished it, it feels almost ready to either go off into the world or be trunked. And so I often use beta readers and occasionally markets. I will say, as a short story writer, there are a few short story markets that always send feedback, and I have been known when I couldn't find a beta reader to just send it to them and be like, "What do you think? I don't know. If you publish it, obviously maybe it wasn't as bad as I thought." But yeah, I basically wait and do a lot of that way later on, and I think it's cool because I think either way can work. It's just knowing what's going to like I can see the benefits of getting it out there and iterating and like doing all that. I think for me, I would find it frustrating because they would tell me something and I'd be like, I know, but I just didn't do it. Like, and that would drive me, bonkers.
Yeah. Um, I will say that when I'm sending it to a critique group, I have done several revisions, but beta readers, but I have also trained them so that they're only giving me the feedback that I want to get, that will be helpful to me. Um, and at what point do you want to do you let's go to part two of our question. At what point do you start to create or solidify the themes?
Hmm. It's a hard question. I'm like, I don't know if there's a specific time when that happens. I think a lot of times I discover the theme, like it's in there, but you just kind of have to tease it to the surface more. I actually find that that can come out a lot when you're trying to describe what you're working on to another person. Like when you try to talk about your story and you don't want to like describe every bit of the plot, then you kind of smush it down into something that's more deliverable to another person. And oftentimes it's the theme that makes that like work as a package. And so sometimes just talking about your work helps with that. And then I'll be like, oh, it really is about loss and how we deal with it. Maybe I should think about that the next time I'm working on my revision. But I don't know, maybe you have a better process.
And no, it's different for me when it's novels versus short stories. With novels, I do actually try to think about not theme, I guess it is, it depends on how you're defining the word theme. I try to think about the question that I'm asking. Um, that there's some question that I'm curious about that I noodle on. Um, like Valor and Vanity is basically Jane Austen writes Ocean's 11. It's it's a heist novel with Lord Byron, and uh, but the question that I'm asking about is how do you deal with it when your spouse has depression and won't acknowledge it?
Hmm.
And so that's the thing that I keep circling around while we're doing all of these heisty things. Um, so those for me, I usually will start to think about that pretty early because it helps me find the scenes that I want to show. In short fiction, I usually finish writing it and someone else says, I really love the theme that you have about, red light, green light, and the way we've got, and I'm like, oh, wow, yeah, yeah, very glad you noticed that. Taking notes about what you just said. Um, so short fiction tends for me to be much more um, uh, even when I plot it, I tend to discover more with short fiction, I feel like.
Yeah, I'll say I also with short fiction, which is my main thing, I often find that it feels thin. Like I will finish a draft and I'll be like, this feels like there's nothing to it. And like, why is that? And then I'll put it away for a while and read it again later and then be like, okay, there's got to be something more going on here. Let me assume there is. What could it be? So sometimes I'll be like, let's just say there was a theme. What is it? And then try to tease it out that way and try to find it, and that helps
Yeah.
for me.
All right. Here's the last of the questions in this question. When do you think a project is ready for querying or submitting for short fiction?
When you're just moving commas, I when you're
Yeah,
I was like
same.
rearranging commas on the Titanic, like when when you've rewritten the same line 18 times or the same
I call
section and you're back to the beginning, you're like this is it's gone as far as you can take it. You got to send it
yeah,
out in the world.
I call this anxiety editing.
Oh, I
Um,
love that.
thank
I
you.
mean, I don't love it
Thank you. I
happening. I
coined
love
it myself.
it.
You're like, oh, ow.
Too real.
um, yeah. So when I have fixed everything that I can articulate, so what is wrong with it and why it's a problem that it's wrong? Like, or not even what's wrong with it. What can I improve? If I am like, oh, I could make this better. I'm like, okay, well, how and why? It's like, yes, you can make it better. But that is true of everything. Everything in that like the most perfect film that you've ever seen, there's something in there that someone could be like, oh, I could tweak that and make it just a little bit better. There's some piece of that whoever let it out into the world is like, okay, I just have to let go of it. So just the fact that you can make it better is not a sufficient reason to hang on to it. It's that there's something that's broken and that you can identify why it's a problem. So it's like, well, I could improve the dialogue. Okay, well, why? What's wrong with the dialogue? Well, there's no subtext. Okay, well, why is the lack of subtext a problem? Well, other books have subtext. Your anxiety editing, let go of it. Um, if it's well, I haven't been communicating clearly to the reader the anxiety that my characters are feeling about talking to each other. Okay, that's a thing that's going to affect your ending. Sure, that's an actual thing. So if you can't identify what a problem is and why it's important to fix it, you are anxiety editing and just let it go. Right. Hey, look, the next question also about editing.
Our favorite.
Um, any tips for someone stuck on editing and revising? How do you decide your priorities on what to edit, change first? And how can you judge your work fairly if it looks bad when you're deep inside it?
Sorry, that phrasing was beautiful.
Yeah.
The so that is it's difficult. I would say to figure out because it's like, what are you stuck on? I think sometimes this is with anything. It's like, let's say you're starting a workout routine. There are parts where you're like, oh, I just need to get this one move right. And there are parts where you're like, working out is bad. I hate it. Nothing is good. Why were bodies invented? And I think sometimes when we get deep in our work, we can get to the point where the problem is that you can't actually diagnose anything because you're like ready to kill the patient. You're like, just take them out. And I think at that time, it's sometimes good to put it down and work on another project for a while, walk away. And when you walk back, a lot of times it's better than you thought it was when you left it because it's just you're too in the weeds to be able to move one way or the other. And you just need to get some perspective a lot of the time, which is why it's always good to have some side project or other hobby or I don't know, go on a vacay with your friends and just keep in your back of your mind maybe, and then look at the words again when you've had a chance to take a breath.
I just want to echo that that's one of the best things when I'm really stuck like that is to walk away from it. If I can write something else and then come back, one of the things that happens is that I kind of reset my story brain a little bit. And then when I'm looking at it again, it's like it's a brand new story because I've filled my story brain with a different narrative. I've also been using this analogy recently about how do you decide on your priorities on what to edit, change first. It's going to sound like a tangent for a second, but bear with me. We have been rewilding our property. It's the old family farm. There's a bunch of invasive species. Someone decided that planting English ivy was going to be a great idea. It's not. It eats everything. Wisteria is beautiful. It's also a tox. Every single part of it is toxic, and it will smother forests. Privet hedge, great for preventing animals from getting through if you need a hedge. But if you don't need a hedge, it just spreads everywhere and keeps wildlife. So it's a problem, right? So we hired these people who specialize in rewilding, and I thought they were going to start in the place where the privet hedge was thickest. And they said, no, you start in the healthiest part of the land. And the reason you do that is that tells you what the land is supposed to look like, and it also keeps invasives from creeping into the unhealthy parts. So what this has changed the way I'm editing, honestly. What I was doing this to a certain degree, but hadn't identified it and was making things more complicated for myself because I would start at the beginning and work my way through, or I well, what I do now is I look at the work and I'm like, what am I happiest with? What's working the way I want it to work? That's the healthy part. How do I make everything else in the book look like this healthy part? And that way, when I'm making changes, I'm able to identify, oh, this is an invasive. This does not belong in the story at all because it doesn't support the healthy part. And the what is the how do you identify the healthy part? It's the part that you're happy with, but also if you're making notes to yourself and you discover that there's a section where you did not make any notes to yourself at all, that's a pretty good sign that that was something that you were happy with because you were just reading it at that point.
I love that. I also I was like, wow, go rewilding people.
I love them.
I was also just thinking about like, which I'm gonna start doing that, but I also sometimes will give myself permission to like write around my story.
Mm,
Like if there's something that I don't like, I did this once with a novel. I've done it a few times where I'm like, I don't understand the character's voice. I'm just gonna write like a random other piece of flash fiction about like the time they, something from their childhood, or I'm going to write like a secret chapter or like a secret part of this story that will never see the light of day, where like things took a different path. And I find that sometimes that actually helps me too, because I think it's not so much the healthy part as like the fun part. Sometimes when writing, I'll talk about candy bar scenes, like the scenes that you just can't
Mm,
wait to get to. And when you're stuck drafting, sometimes you just skip ahead and write that one because it's the most fun. And I think sometimes those scenes don't end up in your final piece, but that doesn't mean that you can't get yourself restarted by getting yourself excited about some aspect of the story because you were able to figure something fun out.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Shall we move on?
Yes.
So, my main protagonist is extremely passive. It's part of his character, bored, cynical teenager. How can I make sure the story remains interesting and fast paced despite an uncooperative main character?
I think I'm curious if the protagonist is truly passive, in that I think passivity is very active. There's a reason passive aggressive is a word. A lot of times people use passivity as a form of resistance. I refuse to care. You cannot make me care about this because like you want me to, but I'm going to be apathetic. Like true apathy, like you really don't care, is difficult. But I feel like bored, cynical teenagers are usually care a lot. They feel a lot of things. It almost makes you think of like Vulcans in Star Trek. They're feeling so much, but saying so little. But that like it's still all in there. And I think the way in which they are passive can itself be a form of activity. The what they push back against, where they're the most cynical, where they're the most apathetic, and how they deal with the things that are coming towards them.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also the thing of, when you start thinking about those things, then you know what the character values, and then you can jeopardize that, which is going to cause them to have to make different choices, to have to engage. Like the beginning of so many stories is the reluctant hero. You don't have to have the reluctant hero, but there's a reason that people decide that, oh, it has to be me. And frequently it's because something keeps pushing them and pushing them out of their comfort zone, or jeopardizes something that they care deeply about. So, look at what is doing that to your character. What's causing them to go, oh no, that is not, mm-mm, and engage.
Yeah. I also think making them really giving them something interesting about them that they're not like competence. People love competent characters. If your bored, cynical teenager is also like an expert anything, origami maker, and is like, while bored, I make really elaborate origami animals, which is cool. Like that is something, especially that you can find a way to take their competence and make it important to the plot. Not sure why origami would be really important to the world, but it could be. And if it is sequel to Paper Menagerie, then how is that something that the character how is that something that the character can then use? And if we see them doing something and overcoming obstacles, even if they don't care about the obstacles, we can care about the fact that there's something that they are moving forward through and past.
Yeah, yeah. um so you just made me think of a thing, and I was going to try to point people to a specific writing excuses episode, and then my brain was like, no, you don't remember. You've never recorded a podcast in your entire life. Um, what class workshop topics do you consider most useful to writers in the earlier stages of their career? So, thinking about first writing project through seeking representation. That depends on your existing skill set. Um, yeah. So, for instance, I come out of live theater, and in live theater, someone gives you a script and a structure, and they tell you where to go and how to stand. But you have to think about, well, what's my motivation? You have to bring the character out. You have to decide how the character walks, what they sound like. Um, So coming into writing, very good with character. Structure was not something, not a skill that I ever had to exercise. So for me, structure classes were the things that I needed. But I know people who've come out of film and television who have structure, but they don't have character because they always just handed it to an actor who did all of that.
Yeah. I would say like it along those lines, like it sort of depends like what do you need is a little bit like where are you emotionally? Because like what's your personal motivation?
Yeah.
If you are feeling bleh about your writing, maybe take a class in a thing that you actually get really well, where you might get somebody who is able to confirm the things that you already think and give you a few extra tools. It's sort of like it gives you that, it's like going to the healthy part of your revision. It makes you feel healthy and you're like, now I can take on the world. If you feel stuck, then maybe go with something where you, I wouldn't say hate it, but are confused by it. I find if you hate a part of writing, it can be hard to take a class in it because you just aren't going to enjoy it. But if you're like, I don't get why my dialogue doesn't work and these other people's dialogue does, where's my subtext in my dialogue? Like, it's bothering me. Then taking a class in it is a great way to kind of figure it out. I'll also say this is going to be just a random aside, but teaching is one of the reasons I love teaching is teaching helps you figure things out. I'm not telling everybody to go get a teaching degree, but you can, after you take a class, teach your cat, dog, origami animal, relatives, people at cocktail parties, things that you learned is like a great way to like cement it in your head and bring it into your toolbox. Because now you didn't just take the tool, you had to show somebody else how to use it. And even if that person doesn't care because they're my cat, they are still there. It's still you going through that process. And through going through that process, you make the tool your own.
I think that's the teach someone else is such good advice. So here's a thing you can try. Um, Go to season 11, Writing Excuses, where we take you through the getting an idea all the way through. Okay, now you're ready to submit it. Listen to each episode and start trying to teach it to someone else. And the ones that you're like, oh boy, I don't actually understand this well enough to teach it. Look for a workshop on that.
Oh, I love that.
This has been Writing Excuses.
I was like, that was our last question. It was so perfect.
Last question. This has been Writing Excuses. You're out of excuses. Now go write. Please listen to the podcast. And also, one thing that I really do want to mention, we are sometimes terrible about plugging ourselves, about talking about our own podcast and the things that we offer. Today is the last day to register for the Writing Excuses cruise before our rates go up. We don't have any control about the rates going up. That is the cruise line. So please, if you want to come on it, if you are looking for a, a workshop that's going to give you really good skills and a very solid network of people, the Writing Excuses workshops are the place to come. We are cruising out of LA in September and heading down to Mexico. We've got Mark Oshiro as one of our guest instructors, and we're going to be covering all manner of things that are designed to help you level up your craft. So please join us.
The dog even agrees that this is the
The
thing to do.
dog, the dog agrees. Look at us tying everything together. See, two unrelated things that just make it all the more exciting and interesting. Thank you all so much for your patience and your questions, and we look forward to seeing you next month. If you want to be able to join the conversation, please join our Patreon. We're about to head over to talk to our patrons in Zoom right now. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.